So this happened a couple years back in my small town in Washington. I was around 11 at the time and was living in a 2-story house, which I really had no weird experiences in. It fit with all the other houses on my block. So, this happened at night. I'm not sure what day or week, as it happened so long ago, but I remember it like it was just yesterday. I was sleeping on my bunk bed, on the top bunk, as I only have one sister. She had her own room, so the bottom bunk was empty. I woke up around 2 in the morning, breathing heavy and sweating. I partially remember my dream, or more specifically, my nightmare. It was about this little girl who just wouldn't leave me alone. She haunted me, and I was alone with her, and to my horror, when I woke up, she didn't leave. I saw her in the corner of my room. She had no legs. Her torso just faded into thin air with her where her legs totally just should have been, and it's just hard to explain. For some context, my bed is in the corner of my room. My closet is at the foot of my bed, and the rest of the room is occupied by a broken red lounge chair. She was facing the chair, staring past it and into the wall. But the way she looked past the wall, she was there for about 5 minutes. 5 minutes of sheer terror. After that, she faded away and was gone just like that. It wasn't sleep paralysis, because I was able to move and think. I ran to my mom's room, like any young kid would. My mom convinced me that it was just because I woke up too quickly. But if that were the case, I wouldn't be writing this. I asked my mom about it a couple of days ago, and she actually said something a little unexpected. She said that moments before I came into her room, she had the same nightmare about a little girl. I've really not had any experiences with the paranormal since then, but I do live by a cemetery from the 1800s. I'm not sure what to make of this, but nonetheless, it was pretty scary. I was deep in the bush of Canberra, staying away for a few nights with my soccer team. We were staying in a cabin about 50 minutes away from the nearest civilization. The cabin is in a valley surrounded by tall hills and mountains. There's plenty of wildlife around during the day. You see kangaroos, wombats, and emus all wandering the bush and valley. It's filled with life. One night, me and my friends were bored, so we decided to go on a late-night walk through the valley. It was about 9:30 to 10, and pitch black. We had our phone lights, and that was about it. We've grown up in New South Wales bush and feel very comfortable out here as if it were our home. There's about 8 of us, and we've been walking through the valley making jokes and having a good time. And we're about 2 kilometers away from the cabin now, and we start walking a trail that goes from the valley to the top of one of the mountains. The trail went on for about another 2 to 3 kilometers, and once we reached the end, it brought us straight up to the tip of the ridge. You could see almost 360-degree view of the entire valley below, and continuous spans of bush, land, and mountain ranges behind us. At the end of the mountain was a ginormous boulder, bigger than any 2-story house you can think of, and it was a strange shape. It overhung the edge of the mountain and had a cave system through the middle of it that went down under the ground level and to who knows where. We didn't want to go inside and find out. At the front of the rock, there was a sign claiming that this land is a spiritual land and is still roamed today by the spirits of the land. Me and my friends seen the sign and took it as bullshit and made jokes about it and started throwing rocks. We decided it was time to start walking back to the cabin. As we were walking away from this massive boulder on the edge of this cliff, and we were about 50 meters away, then I got this sudden overwhelming feeling of being watched. Everything in my mind is telling me to run, but I don't know what from. As I turned around and looked back behind me, what I seen gave me night terrors for 2 years. There was this thing. It looked like a man but was very slender, and its arms were so long its hands hung below its knees. It stood at least 8 to 10 feet tall. It was standing next to a gum tree we had passed just a few minutes before, and its head was as tall as one of the branches that was standing and staring straight at us. I was the first one to see it, and I froze out of fear. My friends realized I had stopped walking and were looking back at me and noticed. They all saw it as well. It bent down and picked up a log that would have been easily 3 to 4 meters long and thick as a telegraph pole, and picked it up and handed it. As soon as we saw this, one of my friends screamed, "What the hell?" We all took off running, straight down the side of the mountain, tripping over and rolling down things. We all booked it to the bottom and met up there. My older brother was due to come the day after, and when he arrived, we told him all about it. Luckily, we all made it back to the cabin, and we didn't leave until sun came up. When my brother got there, he said he didn't see anything, but he said that he felt a very overwhelming energy up there, like there was something watching him the whole time. He said he got a bad vibe up there and didn't want to hang out around for too long. Other than that, that's probably the creepiest thing we experienced that trip. I'll never forget that night, and I was hoping, if anyone has had a similar experience, I'd love to hear it. I suppose the best way for me to let you in on what happened to me and my best friend, at the time, all those years ago, is to begin by telling you that I had no idea what we were looking at in those woods. There was no precedence in my mind for the shape that presented itself in front of us. No preconceived notions of what should be and what shouldn't. Due to this fact, my story won't contain any stereotypical rants of bumps in the night or scary ghouls with black capes and aristocratic Slavic accents. Only the truth will remain when I'm finished conveying what transpired that night. About 20 years ago, my life was fairly aimless. I was a year or so removed from high school, and I was working at my family's business with the aim to eventually take it over. Most of my friends had left our small town for college and the greener pastures it contained. So, I, along with one of the few remaining friends that I had left to socialize with, whom I referred to as Jeff, would frequently spend our time enjoying some of the outdoor activities that our surroundings presented. Some days we fished, others we would swim or boat ride. When in season, we would hunt game like white-tailed deer or the recently reintroduced elk species. The day that I refer to in this account saw us in his Jeep enjoying some off-roading and logging trails that snaked their way through the surrounding mountains. It was about 9:30 in the evening, and the sun had just made its way beneath the horizon by the time we had made it all the way to the trails. Most of the paths we took were wide, flat, paved with gravel and bits of sandstone and coal that fell off the big dump trucks as they were passing through the business haulings. The trail we had wandered onto was one that neither of us had ever encountered. It meandered its way around the backside of the mountain and had become little more than a dirt path that was only slightly wider than the vehicle. Tree branches stretched out like the twisted, leprous arms of some forgotten beast of the wild, forgotten by time. This aside, we were enjoying ourselves and didn't pay these ominous signs any heed. About an hour had passed before we realized that we were all off the main trail and needed to turn around to keep ourselves from not being able to get out. Jeff spotted a trail up ahead of us that went out to the left and emptied into a large field of high weeds ringed by maples and oaks. This would be where we turned around, and also where our perception of what was real in this world got stood on his head. As he slowed the Jeep down and made the turn, the headlight swept over the tops of the weed shafts and settled onto a large, black silhouette. Just slammed his foot onto the brake pedal and sat motionless in a seat, as did I. We both stared out the windshield at a spot in front of the Jeep where the lights settled, but our brains weren't making sense of what our visions were feeding. Standing, at a height of what I estimated to be around 8 to 10 feet tall and about 4 to 5 feet in width, with something that I hadn't seen up until that point in my life, and have not witnessed again. Where the light should have bounced off to different angles and shapes of the body in front of us, it seemed to soak into the shape. The black that made up the only discernible difference from the landscape around it was such an absorbance and absence of any light that it honestly looked as if it were drinking in the light from the lamps of the Jeep. Instead of the shape being illuminated, we were able to tell the shape only by looking at the trees and grasses surrounding it. It was, with risk of sounding foolish, in the shape of a large man with a broad-rimmed hat and some kind of overcoat. The big hat shape that sat on top of the shape in front of us sat on it what could only be called like a slender neck that draped into the shoulders and down into the arms that kind of disappeared into a borderless absence. There were no legs to speak of, nor were there any facial features, as the light acted as if it were afraid of this creature and ran away from it, instead of aiding us to be able to see what loomed before us. "Do you see what I see?" I managed to ask Jeff in a horribly shaken voice. He didn't reply, but instead threw the shifter into reverse and slammed the gas pedal against the floorboard. The back tires slung rock and dust alike into the air as we raced backwards away from this dark anomaly. The cloud enveloped the vehicle from behind and to the sides and blocked the creature from our sight. Normal thought processes ceased to exist the next few seconds when we tried in vain to grapple with what we had just witnessed. We only stopped racing backwards when his truck slammed into a small dogwood tree on the other side of the trail. This seemed to shake the fog from our brains, as Jeff then put the gear shift into first and sped back down the little trail with me screaming a string of curse words that I didn't even know existed. As the tires finally met the asphalt, after what seemed to be hours on end of us careening down a mountain trail, near miss after near miss with escape being the only concept that filled our thoughts, we looked at each other for the first time since seeing the Hat Man, as we called it. Neither of us spoke, as we knew what the other was thinking from expression alone. He dropped me off at the house, and I stepped out of his vehicle not knowing what to say. I turned to look at him, and we both simply nodded to each other. Sadly, we never got the chance to talk about him again. This must have bothered Jeff on a disastrous level, because only a few days after I got home, I got a call from his sister saying that he had overdosed and died. Only over the past couple of years have I heard accounts of the so-called Hat Man or Watchers. Back then, I had absolutely no idea what I was looking at or what to call it. I did know it was there, however. I don't know if we just happened to cross something we weren't supposed to see or what the case may have been, but I have carried that night with me these past 20 or so odd years, this being the first time I've tried to put it all down on paper. I guess the moral would be, well, I don't know what it would be. Just be careful out there. I would like to start by saying, whether you believe in demons or not, I can say that I know they are real and they do exist. What I'm about to share with you are real events that are not fictional. This is why I mention no names, including the demon's name. I get chills just recounting these encounters. To preface, I'm a 45-year-old gay male who lives in a small town in the United States. My demonic encounter started when I moved into my first apartment in the summer of 1992. I was 20 at the time. Unfortunately, my demonic encounter lasted for nearly 8 years before I could finally get rid of it for good. I will only cover a few of the most terrifying occurrences that happened over that 8-year period. Now, on to my story. I have moved to Casper, Wyoming, a town about 55 miles from where I graduated high school. A friend of mine turns me on to a cute 2-bedroom apartment on Elm Street. Yes, I say Elm Street, folks. The apartment was the basement floor of a 2-story house that has been converted into 2 apartments. My friends had recently moved into the main floor apartment and suggested my then boyfriend at the time and I take the bottom unit. It is an ideal situation since we all worked at the same mall at the time. It was mid-June, and there was no air conditioning in the apartment at the time. So, you can well imagine, it was pretty flipping hot in that apartment. I was in the middle of painting the master bedroom when I decided to take a break from the fumes and heat and headed to the kitchen to get a tall glass of iced tea and have a quick smoke. Now, keep in mind, I was the only one in the apartment at the time, as my boyfriend was working. If I recall, it was around 11 p.m., and he was not home to work after about 1 a.m. usually. After finishing my smoke, I headed back to the bedroom to finish painting. As I walked back into the room, I realized there was something painted on the opposite wall of where I had been painting. There was no paint spilled on the carpet and the brush I had been using was right where I left it. My heart so pounding. I crept up to the wall slowly. The paint was still wet and slowly dripping down the wall. I gasped in horror as I read what was painted on the wall. Simply read, "I am here." I bolted the hell out of there and waited inside on the stoop until my boyfriend came home. I was not about to go back to that apartment again by myself. My boyfriend, being the skeptic, dismissed it as maybe I had done it myself without remembering, or that the upstairs neighbor had snuck in and painted it, even though they were not home at the time of the occurrence. Fast forward a few months. We had been gone all day and it was late when we got home. Having an early day, the next day, I headed for the shower while he grabbed himself a beer. As I was showering, I heard the door to the bathroom open and close. I remember smiling to myself thinking he was going to join me for a shower and some playtime. I was in the middle of rinsing the conditioner out of my hair when I heard the shower curtain slide open. "Decided you wanted to come for a quickie before bed, huh?" I asked, still rinsing my hair. "Sounds good to me," a voice said that was not my boyfriend's. The voice sounded gravelly and low. About that time, I felt ice hands grab my shoulders from behind. I spun around only to discover I was in the shower alone. I exited the bathroom in such haste, I did not even bother to grab a towel. Heart pounding and dripping wet, I was now in front of the room, panting and trying to catch my breath. My boyfriend shaking, uncontrollable and pointing to the bathroom. His eyes were fixed on what appeared to be a state of shock. His voice quivering, he whispered, I saw it go in there." Fast forward 2 years. We had just moved into another basement apartment. This one was on the other side of town. It too was a house that had been transformed into separate units. The owner of this house and his boyfriend lived upstairs. They were offering killer deals for rent, so we had to jump on it. I think we were only paying $200 a month for the 2-bedroom apartment. We had only lived there about 2 months before the demonic activity started up again. There were old-fashioned swinging doors like you would find in those old Western movies that separated the front room and the kitchen. We had moved in the new place about 2 months ago and there was no supernatural activity of any kind. We were thinking maybe the entity had not followed us to our new home and had begun to truly relax. We were dead wrong. My boyfriend and I had just finished doing some things, and we were getting ready to settle down to sleep when the saloon doors between the kitchen and the living room began to swing back and forth with a vengeance. The night lights in the kitchen and our bedroom went out, leaving us completely in the dark. "Come play with me," a demonic voice called out to my boyfriend from the kitchen. It was so loud it echoed through the entire apartment. Still shrouded in complete darkness, he both shook there uncontrollably under the covers. We began to quietly argue over who was going to break for the light switch located on the wall by the door. Not knowing what else to do, I yelled for it to leave in Jesus' name. The entity roared so loudly I swear you could feel the house shake. We could hear the saloon doors fly open. The night lights came back on, and we were alone again. For how long we didn't know. It took us about 20 minutes before we could muster up enough courage to move. Needless to say, we did not get any sleep that night and had every light in the place on. Fast forward another couple of weeks, our company for the evening had just left and my boyfriend and I had settled into our recliners in front of the room to watch a movie and chill for the remainder of the evening. A loud knock on the front door signaling one of our friends had probably forgotten their car keys or something caused my boyfriend to pause the movie and head to the door. He stopped short and shot me a concerned look. Puzzled, I asked him if he was going to get the door or not. He pointed out the motion sensor light was not on. Opening the door, he visibly shivered as there was nobody there and no vehicles in the drive but our own. As he shut the door, there came a loud crash and the sound of glass breaking from the kitchen. Walking into the kitchen, it took me a minute to figure out what had happened. The coffee pot was tucked into the corner by the sink and was now laying in a zillion pieces under the dining room table. The knocking started up again on the front door. Again, no light to indicate somebody was actually there. The knocking switched to the back door. Actually, it was more like pounding. The pounding was hard and loud, and I was sure the door was going to cave in. The air became thick and heavy, so much it was hard to breathe. That was enough for us that night. My boyfriend and I bolted out of the house and spent the remainder of the night at a local Denny's restaurant drinking coffee, too terrified to return to that house until the morning. Now, fast forward another couple of years. By this time, we had found a beautiful 2-story home to rent. We loved it because there was a spiral staircase between the 2 floors. The front door led you to the main floor of the home where the kitchen, dining room, and living room were. The back door leads you into the basement where the bedrooms and bathroom were located. It was a way cute little house and we loved it. That is until the entity found us again. I say this because after each move it seemed that it took a while for the entity to find us or show up anyway. I would usually dream that I was standing in a large room with doors all around it. In the dream, all the doors would all start slamming at the same time, as I ran from door to door trying to escape. As the last one was slammed shut, I would try to leave the room, but it would fill with demonic laughter, which is how I knew it had found us once again. The night after having this dream, my husband and I were downstairs in our bedroom, putting our laundry away when we heard my mother hollering down to us from the top of the stairs for us to come up and visit with her. We shot one another a confused look because my mother lived about 55 miles away and never came out without calling first. That, and both the front and back doors were locked. Thinking maybe my mom had made a copy of our house key and of course not wanting to be rude, I headed upstairs to visit, with my husband hot on my heels. As I approached the top of the stairs, I could see the front door was still locked and there was no sign of my mom anywhere. The temperature in the living room had dropped drastically, causing me to shiver. As I moved into the living room, my boyfriend walked to the front door, opened it and confirmed that there was no car in the driveway. That is when we both saw a large, black mass make its way slowly across from the wall from the kitchen into the dining room. Its slow movement appeared to be deliberate, as if it wanted us to see it. As it moved through the dining room into the front, my mother's picture flew off the wall past me and straight into the basement. As the years progressed, so did the entity's activities. It had gotten so bad that even our friends and family refused to come over. They would see the black mass, witness things moving on their own, and heard disembodied voices calling their names. One morning, I had just arrived home from a 13-hour night shift and had settled down on the couch to watch some television before heading to bed. Out of nowhere, there was a huge boom. It sounded like a bomb had gone off. The whole house, and I do mean the whole house, began to shake violently. It only lasted about 10 seconds or so. I am not sure because it felt much longer than that. I quickly ran outdoors thinking maybe a gas main in the chamber blew up or something. All was calm and still, and no one else seemed to be aware of that major boom that had just happened. As I was on the phone to the police department reporting what had just happened, my boyfriend and my brother, who was stayed the night in our guest room, came tearing upstairs in a panic. Their faces were pale and white, and you could see that they were truly terrified. The police assured me that nobody else had reported anything like that, and maybe it was just my house settling. My brother said the house shook so violently, it shook him right out of bed on into the floor. I knew then that it was a demon, and that this time we needed to rid ourselves of it once and for all. I had several ministers, priests, and mediums come to my house. The mediums were at least more helpful than the religious men were, because they were too afraid to do anything at all really besides simply praying and leaving. I finally found a minister who specialized in deliverance ministry. She was well versed in dealing with demonic activity and getting rid of it. She was able to ascertain the demon's name, which gave her power over it, or Jesus, or whatever. She told me it was not her exorcising the demon, but rather the power of the blood of Jesus. I also learned the demon was not actually attached to me, but rather my boyfriend. I learned the reason it always took the demon a while to show back up was that the cleansing rituals I had been doing were working to a point, but that my boyfriend was the one that kept opening up the door, or so to speak, for it to return. I was not aware of it at the time, but he had not only been dabbling in witchcraft, but he was meeting with strangers in the graveyard for sex, since the cops heavily patrolled the city parks. They were once a hotspot for random hookups and drug use. Needless to say, I was able to finally rid myself of the demon and my boyfriend. Unfortunately, for him, the demon followed him and his life quickly fell apart. He got into drugs, alcohol, and worse. He passed away last year expectantly. We remained friends over the years and would talk on the phone or text. I spoke to him a week before his death and he had told me he was still being tormented by the demon. I have no idea what actually happened to my ex. It's all been kind of kept hush-hush, and I just pray he is at peace now. In case you guys were wondering, I'm a 15-year-old male. Short, not very well built. My friend is 15 also. Tall, well built, and I'm not going to give our names, but I'll give you our first names. My name is Holden, and I live in a small town in Indiana. Everyone knows each other, and dog walkers are out all the time, in the morning, in the afternoon, and for nightly jogs. Also, just adding, I'm a mischievous kid, and I don't really get scared by much, but this experience left me absolutely terrified of the dark. Sorry for the long intro, but here goes nothing. Me and my friend Justin were having fun walking around my town, ding-dong ditching people. We were heading to pick up a friend when a cop told us to go home. We told him no, of course, and he said to head home or he will take us home. We told him no again, so he gets out of the car. Me and Justin run and he chases. We run up to a barbed wire fence and hop over. I got a nasty cut in the process. We start running and end up in some woods. We hide in the woods and some bushes. We hear running. We thought it was the cop. But just then, Justin tells me it's coming from behind us. We slowly stand up and turn around, still hearing the running. We see a man sprinting full speed at us. It wasn't the cop, so we sprint in the opposite direction. I was so filled with adrenaline and was so focused on getting the fuck out of there that I didn't realize my friend had tripped. I turned around to see the man has a hold of Justin and he's flashing me a creepy smile. I knew I couldn't leave my friend behind, so I stopped running and I ran up to the man and I smashed his hand with a rock. He let Justin go and we both ran. We come out of the woods onto a sidewalk. A nearby dog walker saw us. He let his dog chase the man the other way. The man disappeared into the woods and we called the cops. The cops searched but didn't find the man. I wonder what would have happened if I didn't turn around. I'm just happy that I don't have to find out. Just a message to everyone: don't get in trouble with the law and don't run from them. It would just lead you into even more trouble. This story takes place during the summer of 2014 in a rural community outside of Klamath Falls, Oregon. All events about to be described are true and worded to the best of my abilities and memory. I was 20 years old at the time and had been working and living on a ranch owned by a childhood friend named Henry. This ranch was a mixture of extremely rocky terrain to dense forest to open field. It's very dry in the summer, very cold in the winter. It is at the top of the Emerald Triangle. The California border was literally 5 miles away. We had one neighbor who lived 19 miles away. Then it was 30 miles into the nearest town. Not many people have taken residence in this area because of how harsh the land is. The Native Americans conquered this land though. I don't know how they managed to survive out there. Henry's wife did not like me because I was the friend that kept her husband away from her. She was a little needy, so I had to set up residence in the furthest cabin away from the main house. The ranch was around 400 acres, and my cabin was on the complete other side of the property. This cabin was well built by the first people who had owned the land way back in the early 1900s. It had been well maintained up until Henry bought the property as well. This part was rarely frequented because of the old equipment, big boulders, and metal on the ground. It's basically no man's land, except for my cabin. The ranch is fenced off into sections to help better manage livestock, so there were 4 gates that had to drive through in order to get to the main house to the cabin. Gates that I had to get out and open, drive through, get out again, and close. I always hated that about living on a ranch. My little car couldn't get around easily out there, so Henry let me use the ranch truck to get from A to B, just as long as I kept the tank full. The truck was a beater, dense all over, covered in dirt, rust, and there was no door on the driver's side, which made it all the more fun to drive, right? This happened one night around 10 p.m. I was about to arrive at the main gate of the ranch after a trip into town for gas and other supplies. I was wide awake because of the fact that the door was missing. Everything seemed normal. It was fairly warm outside and a clear night sky. I was rounding the bend on the gravel road and preparing to turn into a ranch entrance when I came around the corner. In the middle of the row stood a cow. I honked my horn, expecting it to jump out of the way, but it continued to stand still. I almost hit it at this point, but hit the brakes just in time. It was not one of ours because it didn't have our brand or tag. Just stood there, standing in the headlight, staring over them, houses staring directly at me. This cow had an odd look to it. Something didn't seem right about its eyes. It looked scared, as if it were asking for help. I did everything to try and spook it out of the way. I laid on the horn, revved the engine to the point to where I probably did some damage, and yelled as loud as I could at it. Nothing worked. But at the same time, I was starting to feel extremely creeped out by this thing. I didn't like that I was stopped at night out in the sticks, in a vehicle without a door. I felt exposed. Finally, I said fuck it and gave the cow a little tap with the bumper, and it stumbled out of the way slowly, but still stood at the edge of the vehicle as I passed. As I was about to completely pass this thing, the whole truck suddenly rocks as if it was just T-boned. I stop the truck and get out, thinking what the fuck now? In the glow of the taillights, I can see the now corpse of the cow laying in the gravel road, the side of his body completely missing chunks. But there is another mass above the corpse, eating it. I could hear the bones crunching as whatever this was feasted upon the lifeless cow without a care that I was spectating. I softly said to myself, "What the fuck?" And that's when this thing obviously hears me, because it suddenly stands on 2 feet. I can see what it is now. It's a fucking mule deer, but it's standing on 2 feet. It had a huge rack of antlers and a twisted appearance. It stood there as if waiting for me to make an action. I run back to the truck and immediately hit the accelerator. This thing just continues to look at me as I drive off. I come screaming into the entrance to the ranch, but I had to stop and open the fucking gate. No matter how creeped out I was, I couldn't smash through the gates. So, as I get out, I listen for any movement, and it's just silent. So I go and open the gate. The metal screeching sounds put me on edge as it slowly swings open. I get back in and drive through, and hop back out to go close it. As I'm closing the gate, I can hear loud footsteps running towards my direction and heavy breathing in a high-pitched grunting noise. I swing the gate and run back to the truck and continue to drive to the next one as fast as I can. I get to it and open it. The whole time I can hear this thing getting closer and closer, following me. I'm just opening the gates at this point. If I took the time to close them, this thing would catch me up to me and easily get me. I get to my cabin and run inside, locking the door, and I just sit there in silence. I had no electricity in this cabin, so there I sit, in total darkness and silence. About 20 minutes pass and the footsteps return, circling my cabin. I can hear yipping, almost like hyenas laughing. I can hear hoofs tapping the metal of the truck as this thing walked on top of it. I hear it jump to the ground with a large thud and grunt. It knows I'm in the small cabin. There is one window in the cabin. It sits about 6 feet off the ground. Began to hear tapping on both the door and the window. It was almost as if there were 2 of these things. I grabbed my flashlight off my nightstand and quickly shined it at the window. Bad idea. What I saw still deeply upsets me to this day. Oh, never tell anyone, and definitely won't type out every detail. Such a horror should not exist. The tapping grows more intense until it turns into a full-on slamming into the door and window. The only protection I had was a small .22 caliber pistol. The window was the first to break. I braced myself for whatever it was to come inside. A mass appeared at the window, and I unloaded my mag into it. It drops out of the window, making a whining sound, and I can hear footsteps running away. I'm trying to reload, when all of a sudden another one appears at the window. I drop the pistol and grab my hatchet, and I use it to cut kindling usually. I start swinging into this thing like a serial killer, while it struggles to come through the window, clawing at me and growling. I got a good chop on the creature's hands on the windowsill, and it lets out a loud shriek and runs away. I then turn on my lantern and board up the window, not even noticing at the time that the creature's blood was dark black. The footsteps returned after a few hours, but they didn't dare come into my cabin again. And that's how it was from then on. Every night these creatures would return to harass me. They would leave small mutilated animals around my cabin every single morning. I never told Henry or anyone else about this experience. I told him that a piece of wood hit the window while I was chopping. We replaced the window and I bought curtains as well. Eventually, that's what drove me to quit that job and move away. But I think that both the cow and mule deer were skinwalkers trying to ambush me, then realized that I would fight back. There are a lot of Native American ties to the land out here. I don't dare to go back. I think I upset the spirits, and that's what led to my attack. This is my first encounter with such creatures. I hope they'd never return, but they followed me and overall led to my brother's death in April of this year. But that's a story for a different time. I can say one thing though. I have a completely new outlook on life. I feel like there are only a select few that know for a fact that these creatures exist, and I'm not even native. This experience was all too real, and I still have scars from the beast clawing at me. I don't dare go into the forest alone anymore. So, I used to go to a small-town community high school. It was nothing special. We had the usual small-town football games and whatnot. But I'm getting off topic here. So, my freshman year of high school, the whole high school had a humongous staff change. I guess most of the old teachers were tired of putting up with the usual bullshit and decided to either go into retirement or take jobs at other schools. Well, we got a new social studies teacher. For the sake of privacy, we will call him Mr. Mac, which was our nickname for him. Well, one day, Mr. Mac was in one of his usual storytelling moods, and this is where the story begins. Mr. Mac was in college, and he was on a men's softball team. Mr. Mac said he was pretty arrogant in college, and he had already had a lot of student loans and some various debts to pay. Well, it was a sweltering day when a slightly older man of about 40-something or so came up to the dugout and ushered Mr. Mac over as if he had just wanted to strike up a casual conversation. I started talking to Mr. Mac, telling dirty jokes and whatnot. We all of a sudden, according to Mr. Mac, the guy's voice and tone turned deadly serious. He said in a raspy voice, "Hey man, I bet you get a lot of debts to pay, don't ya? And I can pay 'em all off for ya. There's only one thing. You can't tell nobody, not even your parents." Mr. Mac told the man he would think it over, having the feeling something was just not quite right. So, the man and Mr. Mac casually exchanged phone numbers. A week after the meeting, Mr. Mac hears a phone ring. He thinks nothing of it, walks over to it, and picks it up. On the other end, he heard something that sounded like heavy breathing. Before he can hang out, he was thinking it was just some perverts. That same, unmistakable raspy voice came over the phone and said, "Hey man, you thought over my offer yet?" Mr. Mac tells the man that he's probably going to decline. The man, seemingly not wanting to take no for an answer, continues insisting that this is the offer of a lifetime. Mr. Mac was beginning to get pissed, so he grabbed into the phone. I said, "I don't want your fucking money. I will pay my debts off on my own," and slammed the receiver down. He never heard from the man again. But the story does not end there. A few years later, Mr. Mac and his wife are watching the news, and all of a sudden a story about this guy came on the news. It apparently turned out this guy was some kind of sicko who made large amounts of money by taking photographs of unsuspecting young boys and girls and distributing them around the country. Mr. Mac shuddered. "I'm glad I never took this guy up on his offer, because if I had, he most likely would have coerced me into his child porn ring. Or he would have killed me if I refused." He told us to always be careful, and ended with telling us how we all knew what happened to pedophiles in prison.